3 minutes isn't enough.
My very first guest is someone who has been quite outspoken in the past couple of years, and he has a lot of questions for the Tyrone Township Board, but there's never enough time to ask them all, and I don't think he's getting any answers. This is 3 Minutes Isn't Enough, a podcast about what happens at local meetings in Tyrone Township, especially when the conversation doesn't end after those 3 minutes are up. I'm Jeanette, and this is our very first full episode with a guest. So today I'm joined by Gordon Tomaszewski. Did I say that right, Gordon?
That's correct.
And he's a resident who's been speaking at multiple township board meetings and raising questions about things like transparency, budgeting, processes, and even mentioning the problem of rules for thee, but not for me. Gordy, I just want to thank you for being here. But before we get into anything, just quickly, what made you start attending township meetings in the first place?
Well, I've been a resident for 30 years, and I witnessed a period of time with the previous supervisor that the meetings were very short, not so transparent, and that it seemed that, in my opinion, also that the meetings were very selective in the people that are appointed to the boards, outside of the elected officials, of course. So I had some current concerns because I've been around people within the community that are businessmen, and I did happen to notice that there seems to be different standards for some people within the township versus just the residents.
Mm.
And that has always bothered me because I'm a strict constitutionalist. I believe in, it's pretty black and white. And as far as laws and ordinances go, and that there shouldn't be rules for one group of people and not for and not the same rules for the people who are residents.
Right.
So, and
Okay.
the other thing is, I know that Jeanette, you had attended a lot of the meetings, and I had noticed, and I felt you made a lot of great points, and you were shot down, and it was like one person standing on an island. So I had a lot of questions, seeing how there was a change of township officials, and got interested again when we had a whole slate of people running because I very much wanted to see some different people on our board and see the direction of the township change. Such things like we talked about, the transparency and the accountability, which I felt was lacking with the previous administration.
Right. So as we go along here, I'm sure you're going to give me a little bit of your opinion of whether that has improved or not. And I know you're probably hopeful because you keep attending the meetings, right?
Yeah, well, when we started out, I figured once we had seen a major turnover in the township board and the supervisor, I figured that, you know, based on the campaign promises from the current supervisor, Mr. Carnes, and from the newly, elected trustees, I was very optimistic that things would probably change. And subsequently, what I have seen is it's actually devolved into something much worse than what we previously experienced.
Oh.
And the only benefit that came out of it, I can say, instead of turning around and just turning my head and walking away, I decided at this point that now I am going to start looking further into, how our township runs, how it should be run, and the processes that are afforded to the residents to try to hold the township officials accountable. So it's been great as far as from the standpoint that I think our township has become more dysfunctional, but it's also allowed me to have more insight into actually how the township runs, the processes for residents to use to try to get answers, and hopefully at some point, with gaining the knowledge, we'll be able to get the ship turned around.
Right. And there is a process for getting answers, and one of them is our constitutional right to be able to get up and speak at meetings and ask questions. And a lot of people have it mixed up about what that interaction is supposed to be. We have been told by our supervisor that they're not going to answer our questions. Now, when you look at the OMA, which is the Open Meetings Act, it doesn't say that they can't answer our questions. It doesn't seem like we do get our questions answered. Has that been your experience?
Yes, I think mine and I think anybody else that has brought the question. And like you stated, I know even speaking with an attorney, they stated that the law doesn't prohibit the township officials from speaking with the residents. It's whether they choose to engage or not.
Right.
And unfortunately, in our township, it seems to be that we have some selective mechanism in place for when they choose to engage. I'm
Yes.
big on looking. I'm big on looking at other townships, and I know it's always referenced. So you like to kind of look at the townships within your own county. And I've actually visited them. I've spoke with the township officials at other ones just to get a grasp on how they handle things. And it's really eye-opening when you go to other townships and you speak with them, and their process is just simply for their public meetings. Most of them I've spoke with, they welcome commentary from the public, and they also do like to interact with people. Of course, they want to keep things on a nice tight time schedule and not, run where they're going to run into very lengthy, conversations, but they do give the residents the opportunity to address some of the issues. And it just, and in speaking with those officials, they've turned around and mentioned that first and foremost, they're there for the residents. That's what the meetings are about. And that second, they're there for the government, which they're part of, but they always refer back to the fact that their first and primary concern is for the residents
And
and
you're
the
talking
needs of the
about
residents.
townships that you've talked to, not Tyrone
Yep,
Township, but other townships that you've spoken with. Yeah,
correct.
where we've gotten a mixed message at meetings where we've been told everything from this is a meeting for the board, this is the township's money, not the residents. So there's a little different attitude there, I would say.
Yes, and that's the whole problem is it's the perception of the people who are leading. Do you believe that you're here for we the people, as the Constitution says, or do you believe that you're here for the government? And like I said, in speaking with the other townships, their belief is that they're here for the people and that they want to consider and they want to do what's best for their community.
Right.
And they don't want to be adversarial. And that's where I think our township has kind of gone off the rail because the other townships, most of them, which Tyrone Township used to, they afforded two public comment periods. And actually, even some of them offer more because if there's a specific item uh, on the agenda, they'll allow residents to speak on that specific item also. So to me, it's a very good interactive way to hold your meetings with your residents and answer their questions. And in our township, unfortunately, they've decided that the best route is to turn around and take away the availability for people to comment and interact with the government. So it just it contradicts everything else that's going on on around us in other townships.
And that's what we heard from the whole campaign was that there was going to be workshops, 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 and ways for the people to actually to fix that divide between the people and their government. And so we're seeing that pushback even more now, which is disheartening and discouraging. I'm hoping that one day that can change and again that we have those two public comments. Now, what's important about the two public comments is that first public comment near the beginning of the meeting, you're able to voice some things that maybe a board member will hear and say, you know what, that's a good point. I need to think of that when we're discussing these items. But the second public comment lets you comment on what they've done during the meeting. So now you don't get that opportunity. That's unfortunate because it closes down that communication. I know that you had said you could come in every day and make it a habit. You were talking about if they're not going to answer you at a meeting, that you would just come in then every day.
Yep. Well, and I think that's the thing where the problem lies, by not having workshop or having more public, commentary and answering people for our office to, work efficiently. They work 4 days, so 32 hours. And the idea in my take would be for to get as much information out because the meetings are broadcast on YouTube.
Mhm.
So it gives them the opportunity to answer questions that maybe other residents who don't have the time to attend, or otherwise they'd have to come into the office, ask questions. It allows them to use their time more efficiently in performing their duties, in the township office.
Yes.
And I know personally, I don't want to go in and have to ask, 5 or 10 questions, a week or whatever it may be. But if every resident did that, and I made the point that, they would tie their time up, uh, just in answering people as they come in and out of the office, and that's not efficient. So, like I said, the whole idea with these the meetings is it's supposed to be about the transparency, informing your constituents, and then also it's about efficiency.
Well, yes, and chances are the questions that you have are questions that other people have as well. So why not answer them when you can get that answer across to the public, especially when they know the answer? That would be nice.
Exactly.
I was looking at some of the more recent meetings. I'm mentioning the date because people can go back and look at these recordings online. But in February, I think it was February 17th, you talked about FOIA handling. You started to question how FOIA requests were being handled. And for those people that don't know what FOIA is, it stands for Freedom of Information Act. And it's our right as residents to be able to access public records and be able to see what's going on in our government. Do you remember asking about that or commenting about that at a meeting? I think you have a
Yeah,
few times.
yep, and actually, it's something I'm delving into a little bit more now because I've watched some other townships and they have very similar issues. So it's really nice sometimes to observe and learn from the other townships. And I know it's spelled out in Michigan law that the board is actually supposed to appoint a FOIA coordinator. And and this is something, like I said, I'm looking further into, but that I know of, I've never heard where I've attended a meeting, and especially once we had the new board come on board, and I've never heard where we've turned around and had a vote and appointed a FOIA coordinator for the township. Typically, that function, from what I've read, can fall on many people, but generally the clerk is the person who ends up with that responsibility. And Tyrone Township, it has always been that the clerk is the person who had been answering the FOIAs. The issue I have and I've addressed is for some reason we have an attorney who is not an elected representative of the township, but that individual seems to be the newly deemed FOIA coordinator in Tyrone Township. And even though the law protects us as to what they could charge for FOIA requests and such, it doesn't make great fiscal sense if we're going to pay, you have to pay for the lowest rated employee's wage per hour to cover your FOIA request. And as an example, let's say that's $20 an hour. But if we have an attorney, we're paying $160 or $170 an hour to look into those requests. It doesn't make sense to me, even though the township can only charge that $20, we're net, I mean, we're at a deficit on how much we're paying in township resources. So that's not efficient use of capital.
Mhm.
And that's where my problem lies.
And I
And
think that that February 17th meeting, you did talk about how much are we paying Mr. Woodmeyer, who is the township attorney, and you said you FOIA'd that information, but you also said, according to him, he works for free. So that seems to be a little bit of a discrepancy also. I don't know of any lawyers that work for free, or really anybody who works for free.
yeah, and I've worded it a couple different ways because something I've realized in dealing with the people at our township now, instead of wanting to actively just answer things truthfully, we've turned into where at our township now, the FOIA process is turned into, it's a game of legalese, that if you don't have the right questions, they're not worded properly, then you've got to jump through hoops and resubmit, FOIA requests again. And as I said, that's not efficient. It's not efficient for a resident, and it's not official for a township if they're going to answer and deny these things. It would be much easier for them to just go ahead and provide the pertinent information and simply, write that FOIA request off the books.
Yeah.
But and like I also mentioned, I've asked on several occasions as to how the township attorney is being paid, because I noticed a shift. I do believe it was probably last October or November that on my FOIA request, initially they were being answered by the clerk and the deputy clerk. And then magically at some point, all FOIA requests seemed to be getting answered specifically by our, legal representative. And that just, that to me is very odd. And this is where, going back to other townships, in my inquiry with the other townships, that was one of the questions I had to them. I asked them, do you use your attorney to handle your FOIA request? And they said, absolutely not. We don't. There would only be one exception, and that is if somebody's in litigation and they felt it was something that could be detrimental to their their lawsuit, then they may have the attorney handle it. But they said otherwise they do not do that, that they always have the elected officials handle FOIA requests because that's what residents voted on.
Yeah.
So again, we're, comparing ourselves. And that's my whole issue with dealing with the township on this stuff. Like I said, when I started, I was not the most knowledgeable person. I'm still not. I have a lot to learn, but it's been a great exercising learning about government. And the best place to start is on the local level. And that's where, like I said, just recently I started looking more into it. And as far as how or who is supposed to be the FOIA coordinator, and there is a process for it. And the biggest thing is, and I've addressed with our board, is that it seems we're entrenched in the same old system, and it's the same old, as they say. Instead of looking to improve, the township for the residents, it's at every chance we've had is people are fighting it. And I'm a person, I learned a long time ago that change is good, and that's why we vote people out, we put new people in. It's great to have people with other ideas, and everybody sees things, differently. And it's just like our public comment periods. You shouldn't look at those as being adversarial, as far as I'm concerned. People can critique people. And I think what you do is if you have a melting pot of people, just like a board is, then the idea is, hey, let's put this issue forward. Let's all put our brains together and let's come up with the best possible solution. And a lot of times when you get that, when you get a whole host of different people looking at it from different ideas, you can take the strong points and throw out the weak points, and you can come to some great conclusions by doing that. But you have to have an open mind to do it.
Right. Absolutely. You have also spoken about complaints and that whole complaint process, which is, what does it take to file a complaint?
Yeah, well, and that's an ongoing issue. We don't have anybody addressed specifically to handle the complaints. I mean, except for zoning issues.
Yes.
That they do, but general complaints to the township in regards to code of conduct, employees, maybe you have an issue with an employee, or you have an issue with a trustee or whoever. There's nobody specifically. The head of the township, of course, the supervisor, he has the authority to hear the complaint. But the problem is, if we do write something, there is absolutely no formal written policies on how complaints will be handled. There is no formal policies on any type of disciplinary actions and how they're meted out. So it's very subjective. And again, in dealing with other townships, they have processes and they have procedures where it spells out for people that are violating, their policies, what the appropriate disciplinary actions could be.
Right.
And that's just something I think is very simple. You would expect, because in almost any private enterprise, people, they have attendance policies, they have policies for your conduct, and it's typically spelled out where, those, whatever type of actions that somebody takes, uh, what could be an appropriate disciplinary procedure to, handle for that complaint.
Right. And what about even just acknowledgement when you have a concern? Now, there used to be a complaint form on the website just for submitting general complaints, and they removed that. But I wish that there was a policy so we would know as residents what happens when you do make a complaint. Anything or nothing happens at all.
Right. Well, I know I have a copy of, the internet usage agreement for the township employees, and I also have their code of conduct for the township employees. And as I stated, when you look through there, it doesn't specify anything in there about disciplinary actions and what could potentially happen to people for violating provisions of the code of conduct, or let's say the internet usage agreement. And there should be very definitive language, in as far as I'm concerned, because in that way it shows that you have control of your employees and that you're setting a standard that they know right up front that where that line is. If they cross it, what could end up happening to them.
Right.
We don't have that. Like I mentioned, other townships do have that. So I think it's just something, and not to browbeat on our township, but it's just, these are things that, you see as improvements and things that they could fix relatively quickly if they just had the appetite to do so.
Right.
And it would be a lot better for, all the residents as well as for the employees, because then, they specifically know where they stand and, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate.
We do have a newly revised code of conduct that the board voted on. There's been something blatantly violated in that code of conduct. And now some people might say that the item that was violated is not so important, but it is in the code of conduct. It's for all people that attend meetings. In your opinion, is it important for them to follow that code of conduct? Is it even something that they can follow?
Well, I think our code of conduct's pretty vague. And then the biggest thing is the enforcement part.
Right.
The mechanism that they have for enforcing it, that's extremely vague also. The only thing I can speak from personal experience witnessing is that there is selective enforcement of our code of conduct. And that may not always be due to so much the nature of the offense, but I think it's more the nature of the offender that's perceived. And, that's just, that's not a good way to enforce it. It's pretty much, like I said, it's black and white. If you're gonna use the code of conduct to disbar people, say, from coming in, or throw them out from the meeting for misconduct, it's a one size fits all, that if one person does it, you can't make an exception for anybody else. It's just got to be an even playing field for everybody.
Right, right. I would love to have you back again because I think there's so much to talk about, even delving more into the whole FOIA issue, complaints issue, and there's some other things that have happened lately that I know are ongoing concerns that are going to come to the public's attention at some point that you may want to speak on. And I know we will be having someone on shortly, maybe the next episode, who has been called out for that code of conduct, and this person doesn't feel like they were treated fairly or equally, but we'll talk about that also. Is there anything else that you would like to bring up or that you could think of that is important for people listening today to know about?
Well, my biggest thing is I hope with this podcast that we can get more township residents to pay attention to what's going on in the township. Ideally, educate people. like I said, I'm learning. I mean, I'm 66 years old, and you should never quit learning. So, and the other thing is, if you learn and you educate yourself, and people decide they can make good decisions based off that education, and then we can go in and try to hold people accountable, and not just necessarily the idea that we always have to go in and people have to deem it's trying to bash people or discredit people. When people do things right, you know what, I'm one of the first people, I'm going to tell you did things right. You're looking out for our interest, and I think that's the whole idea, is just to get a more informed electorate of people, and let people see what's truly going on in the township, and without trying to be biased, and without trying to get into slandering and defaming people.
Yes,
And it just it'll make the township a lot better place.
I agree. Good points. Well, thank you so much for coming on and continuing to show up and showing up at these meetings and voicing your concerns and asking the questions. I think that's really inspiring to a lot of people, and I know that I really appreciate you being there, Gordy. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I think there's a lot of great residents and people that have a lot to contribute to the podcast, and there's a lot of great information. And like I said, I think hopefully if we get enough people, we can start maybe getting some of the change we were looking for, and get the township, to look at some of the surrounding communities and maybe mimic them on some of their things. It doesn't hurt to take some ideas from somebody else.
That is true. Very true. Well, thank you, Gordy. You have a great night, and we'll be talking to you soon.
All right. You take care.
Thanks. You too.
It isn't enough.
Bye bye.